Before even getting into this review, I'd recommend watching the one I did on the main game 2 years ago, as well as the tips and tricks video if you want to get into some intricacies with the gameplay. As this is the DLC, all of it obviously builds off of the main game, so there's no need to cover the same stuff twice. So, with that out of the way, while there's a lot that I love about Final Fantasy VII Remake, and a lot that I hate but can ultimately look past, the DLC surprised me by leaving me pretty lukewarm. And keep in mind that Yuffie is one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters, and they did her personality and gameplay justice here, but there's a lot else about the DLC that doesn't hit the same highs as the main game. The story has Yuffie on a mission directly from the Wutai government to infiltrate Shinra headquarters and steal their new ultimate materia. She meets up with a branch of Avalanche agents and another Wutai soldier, Sonon, and the two go on their little adventure, eventually uncovering more Shinra secrets than they bargained for. This new story is okay, nothing too special, but it is cool that it further fleshes out the world. These new Avalanche members don't associate themselves with Barrett, Tifa, and the rest of the original crew, as they take their missions too far and don't consider the collateral damage. Much of this topic was already covered in the main game, but it's cool to get an alternate perspective, like how Wutai natives might not see a difference between Midgar and Shinra, but there are a lot of innocent lives at stake. As for the characters, Yuffie is great. You either love or you hate her ridiculously chipper attitude and short temper. She's much like how she was in the PS1 original, so take that for what it is. I also love her mogul cloak. It's such a cool design that I'm hoping comes back in the future. But purists don't have to worry, as her classic outfit is in too. Sonon is alright. He's mostly there to bounce off of Yuffie's comic antics. As you can expect from an original character made specifically for this DLC, there's not a whole lot to him. His backstory about wanting revenge against Shinra for the war is pretty shallow, basic stuff, but he's not too bad either. Scarlet takes center stage as the main antagonist here, which is cool, she does a good job. You won't see much of anyone else though, at least not outside of some very brief scenes. I'm okay with that. I usually prefer smaller, more focused stories, but I do wish there was just a little bit more, and it doesn't help that the subjects are largely retreading old ground. Also, I'll try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but a couple of characters from the expanded Final Fantasy VII universe also make an appearance at the tail end of the DLC. Even though there's a major boss fight involved, I struggle to call their inclusion prominent. It comes off more as a cameo, and along with the epilogue cutscenes, it's mostly a hint at the direction the series is going in. Anyway, speaking of retreading old ground, much of the DLC takes place in the Sector 7 slums, which any player of the main game is going to be very familiar with. The layout is the same, and there's not much to do aside from a new minigame based around Fort Condor that I'll get into later. The brunt of the game takes place in an abandoned Sector 7 factory, and afterwards the lower basement levels of the Shinra headquarters. There are 2 main dungeons with a few smaller bosses and 1 major boss fight each. This stuff is pretty good. None of it reaches the heights of some of my favorite moments, and I wouldn't consider any of the bosses here to be standout examples of what makes this game great, but this is a solid enough addition to the main game. Yuffie, of course, is the standout star here, and she has some excellent new tricks that are unique to her and her playstyle. She's just as strong up close as she is at long range, and switching between the two is key to succeeding with her. She can launch herself away from the enemy mid-combo, and pressing the triangle button launches her giant shuriken, which attaches itself to an enemy and deals constant damage. From here, Yuffie's basic attack is replaced with ninjutsu, dealing quick magic damage which can be customized on the fly to change to a specific element. You can also have Yuffie fly back to her shuriken to retrieve it early and transition into an air combo if physical damage is the way to go. She is a highly mobile character suited for any situation, and what she lacks in raw power, she more than makes up for in speed. Yuffie's special abilities have some really interesting properties too. Windstorm essentially turns her shuriken into a massive sticky bomb, and Banishment is basically a mini limit break, powering up the longer that a battle goes on for. My favorite, however, is the Brumal form, which has Yuffie disappear and leave a ninja decoy behind, allowing for some dodges that were close to impossible in the main game. And, better yet, successful dodges further reward the player by filling up the ATB gauge, so it's never a waste when it's used properly. Perhaps most interesting is the parry mechanic. Similar to other action games like Metal Gear Rising or Sekiro, blocking an attack the moment before it hits you will now have Yuffie perform a parry, and different additional effects are bestowed depending on the weapon used, such as instantly granting a free barrier, mana wall, or regeneration. Yuffie is awesome here, her playstyle is fully fleshed out, and there's a ton that can be done with her. As for Sonon, well, while there's a lot to cover for Yuffie, there's next to nothing to talk about for Sonon, because you don't control him. Similar to Red 13, Sonon is basically a guest character, and while he is slightly more involved than that, you can give him commands and customize his equipment, you cannot directly control him, and he doesn't have a whole lot special about his gameplay. You can do synergized commands, Chrono Trigger style, which is really cool, but it's a shame that they didn't fully develop this character in his gameplay. To make things worse, aside from the final boss, none of the battles are particularly challenging or demand much from the player. A lot of this is due to Yuffie's ninjutsu being so powerful that you can just hang back a lot of the time and let Sonon try to take most of the attention, and you'll do just fine. Even if you did want to take it further and really master Yuffie's gameplay, there's the nagging feeling that something is missing, and that something is additional party members. Final Fantasy VII Remake was really strong for offering an action RPG where the whole party could, essentially, be controlled at the same time, and its strength came from organizing the team and executing the plan in real time. Yuffie is excellent on her own, and while she's just as fleshed out as Cloud, if not even more so, there isn't enough here to justify a completely solo outing. I'd also argue that, while the parry mechanic is awesome in theory, the enemy attack patterns have always been too haphazard for precision blocking. It works for Cloud's infinite parry mechanic, but not so much for Yuffie's precision timing. Of course, her disappearance trick is a suitable replacement, only problem being that it does require ATB to perform, and it's a pretty big waste if you mess it up. I just really wish that Yuffie could have had a better defensive option. Maybe incorporate something like Utsutsemi from Final Fantasy XI? It could have come at the cost of MP or something, which would be nice because due to Yuffie's ninjutsu, she basically never has a reason to spend MP other than on healing and supportive magic. A lot of the combat in Intermission feels like a missed opportunity. You have this awesome new playstyle, but none of the gameplay properly supports it in interesting ways, aside from, oh no, the boss is far away now, better throw your shuriken instead, I guess. Like, I don't see a reason why this needed to be Yuffie. Cloud and his crew could have done this all just as well, and it would have been more interesting too since I'd have to jump around between my party members to do it. In fact, I'm disappointed that there isn't the option to play Intermission with the original cast, or to include Yuffie into the main game, just for fun as a neat unlockable bonus. There is a neat unlockable bonus though after you've completed the DLC. Yuffie and Sonon get their own virtual reality battles to take on, and one additional fight gets added to the main game for Cloud and his crew to challenge. Keep in mind, however, the difficulty is absolutely insane for that last one, but it is a nice bonus all the same. There's also the unlockable hard mode, which functions the same way it does in the main game. The last thing to cover is Fort Condor. Normally I wouldn't make a big deal about this, especially since it's a completely optional minigame, but a lot of work was clearly put into it, and it covers about a quarter of the entire DLC. Inspired from its original incarnation in the PS1 game, Fort Condor has 2 players customizing their base with different health, speed, and magical ability loadouts, as well as building their army from a huge list of units. A lot of elements carry over from the original game, like unit type advantages and pushing the front line into the enemy base, although it's a lot harder to cheese this version of the game. You actually have to play by the rules and get good at it. The initial playthrough isn't so bad, but it gets much tougher on hard mode. If you really wanted to get into this, then I think it can be a fun time. Too bad it's single player only, although I can see this being an unbalanced mess, so maybe that's for the best. And that's my big takeaway here. Too bad this, too bad that. Intermission is pretty cool, but it's lacking where it really counts. A single character experience in a game built around multiple party members is really lame. And to top it all off, I cleared it in 10 hours on the normal difficulty. I guess that's not so bad for a $20 DLC, and I bought it on sale for $15, but it left me wanting more, and it wasn't really there. I want to say that if you loved Final Fantasy VII Remake's gameplay, then you should get this, but I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake's gameplay, and I was let down a little bit. The ending sequence also left me with a poor taste. The game ends so suddenly after the final boss, right when I was just getting the hang of controlling Yuffie's playstyle, and then it's over. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it ends suddenly. The ending cutscenes sure as hell go on forever. Maybe my expectations were too high, and to be clear, it's not bad, but it's something you can pretty easily skip out on and miss nothing. Oh well. Thanks for watching my review on Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission.